Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your hour with us today for our Wednesday webinar series. My name is Alice Fox, and I am the Director of Talent Delivery at Talent Connections. I am joined by Susan Kent, Vice President of Career Spa, and John Palumbo, Director of Marketing for Talent Connections. A few housekeeping items today before we start our webinar is that this is a 1-hour recorded webinar. If you have any technical questions, please email John Palumbo at johnpalumbo@talentconnections.net. His information is on the screen. Participants will be muted throughout. You can use the question and answer section in the throughout the webinar if you have any questions. I know also that Shatanese will definitely be having some open questions, so definitely make sure that you have, even if you're eating your lunch and spending your lunch with us today, that you're able to be as interactive as possible with our question and answer sessions. We will have that a question and answer session at the time as well at the end of the presentation. This webinar is approved for 1 SHRM Professional Development credit, and this activity code will be given at the conclusion of the webinar. Today, I am pleased to introduce our speaker, and we're so happy to have her with us today. Shatanese Reese, CEO of Shatanese Reese LLC, has over 25 years human resources experience. Her career includes coaching, training, facilitation, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, talent acquisition, employee relations, investigations, performance management, and employee engagement. As a certified EQ and DISC consultant, Shatanese enjoys creating space for difficult conversations and impacting culture through increasing self-awareness among teams and leaders. Thank you so much, Shatanese, for being with us today. We're so excited to hear your presentation and very informative and much needed conversations for sure. So take it away.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to everyone on the Talent Connections team. You all have been so gracious with getting everything prepared for today. And as I stated at the top of our call before all guests came in, I'm so excited to be here today and also to talk about this specific topic. So Alice offered all of the, nice formal items in terms of a little bit about me, but I want to offer, some of the informal items. So I am mom to the Reese's Pieces. And so you see there on the screen, the image at the top on the left, that is our entire immediate family. And so my husband and I, we have 6 individuals. I've given life to 6 individuals. And so you can see the oldest is actually working on her PhD in microbiology. She's almost finished. And then the oldest son works at Georgia Power and just recently got married. So I now have a daughter-in-law, which is really exciting and totally new. And then I have 4 that are still in school. High schooler who has aspirations to be on Broadway. And then I have 2 middle schoolers now. They're both at the same school, an 8th grader and a 6th grader. And so we have an athlete. Hannah wants to someday play NFL football. So remember Hannah Reese. And then Nina, Nina Sophia, she and I co-authored the book series, The Adventures of Nina Sophia. So if you are curious or have little people in your life, check out our book series on Amazon. And then Josiah, he is now in 4th grade, and they're all my heart. They each have special places in my heart. And I'm also an athletic enthusiast. So I don't know about you all, but I was during the Olympics, especially the track and field, like yelling at the screen, like go, 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 because of my level of competition. So you can see there the image on the lower left-hand side. I did a Tough Mudder with my oldest son, and you can see the lower right-hand side, that's the 2 of us. So if you've never heard of the Tough Mudder, it really, truly is tough and it's a lot of mud. So we went through a series of obstacles, multi-hour. So there were like 13 obstacles if we wanted to do that, or we could have done the 25, and I was not doing that, but I survived. I survived. It was a lot of fun. It was hard. The two of us had to serve as partners, helping each other through the obstacles. And that picture there on the far left, lower left, that's me contemplating and just, really evaluating every decision that I'd made in my life to that point. Uh, one of the kids said I looked like a zombie, but I was so grateful, number one, that we finished, and that we finished strong. And then you see the top right image last November. It's hard to believe it's coming up on a year. I competed in my first ever bodybuilding competition. And I placed, that I got some hardware. So as the Olympians were like biting their hardware, I can remember that day. So I was just in the first level. There are multiple levels in bodybuilding competitions. So if you're not familiar with that, I was in the first level. But it was so difficult to be disciplined. The sacrifice, because either if I was not eating or sleeping, I was in the gym, and balancing that with being mom to the Reese's Pieces, and managing a business that's been in existence now for 7 years. It was a lot. And so to be able to stand on stage in my 50s and say, I did it, it was so empowering. So I just want to encourage each of you that if you have a goal, have something in mind that you've always wanted to try, do it. Do it. Nothing's guaranteed in terms of time. So I just encourage you to do it. And so, why am I interested about this topic in terms of neurodiversity? It's primarily because of Josiah. Josiah was diagnosed with Down syndrome, actually, while he was still in utero. We went in for the detailed ultrasound, and I could tell that something wasn't quite right because the tech kept spending a lot of time in certain areas. And so I wasn't fully surprised when I got the call that I needed to come back in for testing. But I tell you, I was just honestly devastated when we learned that there was a 99% chance that he was going to have Down syndrome, and that he was having heart issues, in the womb. And so Josiah was born. Gratefully, he didn't have to have surgery until he was 4 months old, but open heart surgery. And going into that hospital room after the surgery and seeing just tubes everywhere was probably one of the hardest moments that I've experienced as a mom. And then leaving him there in that hospital, so that he could heal, was also just difficult. But Josiah today is 9. And you can see there the image on the left. We're actually serving as wedding participants in a wedding of one of my relatives. And so Josiah was the ring bearer. And then you can see on the far right, Josiah was in Special Olympics softball. And he loves running the bases and, hitting the ball. So there's a Miracle League that works with individuals who have limited abilities, so that they can actually experience that sport. So it's actually indoors and not on a field. So this is my why. And I have been learning a lot about just disabilities and neurodiversity as it pertains to me serving as a caregiver to Josiah, but also learning more about myself, just in terms of my later age and how I'm interacting with life and work. And I'll share a little bit more about that. So I'll pause and just see, are there any comments in the chat or anything along those lines before I get started?
Nope, we are good to go, and everybody's just hanging on every word. So we're good to go.
All right, great, phenomenal. So today we will, I'm sorry, Alice, I cut you off.
No, no, it was all good. All good.
We will talk about neurodiversity, kind of as a concept that encompasses a range of neurological differences. We'll also recognize the distinction between neurodiversity and the traditional disability paradigms. At the end of this, I want you to be able to kind of view neurodiversity as a natural variation in cognitive functioning rather than a deficit. And then we'll kind of explore practical strategies for fostering an inclusive workplace, which is extremely important, not only from an HR perspective, but also just simply as a leader and as a good human. Right. And then we'll discuss, what role human resources plays in, monitoring policies, implementing policies and practices that kind of support neurodiversity. So that's kind of our roadmap for today. So fasten your seatbelts. Let's dive right in. And so our first opportunity for engagement. When you hear neurodiversity, what comes to mind? What word, what phrases? So please feel free to use the Q&A feature and drop your ideas in the chat. When you
We
hear,
have someone says different, autism spectrum disorder,
awesome.
Diversity of thought, open to different thoughts, special.
I like diversity of thought. I hadn't heard that before, so that's great. I'm trying to get this.
Different brains are a natural part of human diversity. Different ways in which brains process input, differences in neurological, varying degrees of cognitive abilities, learning disability. So lots of great answers and different answers for sure.
Yes. And so true to form, just the varying ideas and answers that you've dropped in the Q&A function, that represents each of us in terms of our diversity and how we're processing and how we look at information and take it in. And so I want to offer this particular definition. Neurodiversity refers to the range of neurological differences found among individuals, encompassing various ways in which people's brains function and process information. And so if I wanted you to focus on a few words, basically how we take in information, digest it, and then refer it back out. That's essentially kind of how neurodiversity is defined. I also want to offer this definition according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which says individual differences in brain functioning regarded as normal variations within the human population. And so why is this important? Neurodiversity is a natural and valuable form of human diversity. And the reason why this topic became really important to me, including Josiah, but also from a human resources and DEIA practitioner perspective, people process information and life in different ways. And if we're not fully aware of the differences or the subtle differences, we may dismiss someone. We may misinterpret or misunderstand someone. We may not really truly appreciate the value that they bring to the team. And so as I've seen this play out within teams, as I've seen various leaders kind of struggle with this concept, it became really important for me to make sure that, especially as HR professionals, we have an awareness of kind of what to look for, what to listen out for, and then how to support and really make sure that the environment, the work environment is inclusive. It truly is about inclusion. The neurodiversity movement advocates for accommodations and support rather than attempting to cure or fix these differences. And so I can remember earlier on in my life requesting to have the radio turned down, for example, not understanding that the cacophony of noises that I was hearing was really impacting how I was processing. And I didn't have words to put on it. I couldn't articulate what was happening for me. And so this may be occurring in multiple sectors within your workforce. And managers may be complaining about certain employees, but not necessarily realizing, or the employee may not be fully aware that there's something simply going on with how they're processing, how their brain is taking in information. Let me give you another perspective. And so some of the responses that you dropped in the Q&A section earlier actually alluded to a number of these. Neurodiversity exists on a spectrum, exactly as you see it there on your screen. And so you have autism, you have dyslexia, you have ADHD. You also could have diabetes or OCD. Those are some opportunities in some ways that neurodiversity shows up. Tourette's syndrome, dyspraxia, as well as other intellectual disabilities. So as I stated, sometimes people haven't fully been tested, and so they don't know that maybe they're experiencing life through one of these various approaches, one of these various neurodiverse ways. And so, we have neurodiversity and we have neurotypical. And so we'll talk a little bit about language as well, because we want to be mindful of the words that we're using. And I'll pause here because as a DEIA practitioner, oftentimes what I hear is, Shatanese, I feel like I can't say anything. I feel as if I'm walking around on eggshells and everyone's just hypersensitive, and anything that I can say or potentially say could be taken as an offense in some way. And the reality is that may be true. But I want to encourage each of us to continue on our journeys and still attempt to connect with people. And when it has been brought to our attention that an offense has occurred, that we hold space for that person to express how that behavior or comment landed with them, and then be able to apologize if requested, not an empty apology, not an apology, well, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, or I'm sorry that you didn't take it the way that I intended. Not like that, but truly listening to the impact of what has occurred. So even as a DEIA practitioner, I can still offend. And so it's important that we all just extend that grace and mercy. I think what has happened in today's world is that people are becoming more brave. They're becoming braver and being more vocal about how things are landing with them. Of course, it's important for everyone to focus on getting the work done. And I know that I have colleagues that will say, I just want to come to work, do what I'm supposed to do, and go home. Totally understand that. Again, we're all so complex. I don't necessarily adopt the work-life balance idea. I like the idea of work-life integration. Because with technology and even after the pandemic, we've made so many different changes. And so there's a lot of blending going on. And with that, that's where the grace and the mercy can come in. And so I want to highlight maybe a few individuals that perhaps you weren't aware of, or maybe you thought about that are successful, but have also self-identified as being neurodivergent. And so you have Temple Grandin there, who is an animal scientist and author. You have Sir Anthony Hopkins, who is an Oscar-winning actor. I've enjoyed a number of his movies. And then you have Florence Welch, who is a musician as well as a singer. And then in honor of the Olympics, we have Simone Biles, who is an Olympic gold medalist. And then we have Greta Thunberg, who is a climate activist. Experts also believe that perhaps Marie Curie, Vincent van Gogh, Albert Einstein, that even some of those individuals may have been neurodivergent based on some of the information that they shared and put out for all of us to understand and enjoy. And so the reality is you could be sitting next to someone who is neurodivergent, say that fast 5 times, and may not even know it. They themselves may not know it, or they know it and have chosen not to disclose. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And so it's not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. I appreciate this quote from Audre Lorde, and many of you may have seen it before, but I want you to think about this quote and look at it through the lens of accessibility and inclusion. And so instead of connecting or coaching a manager on what the employee is not doing in terms of their work performance or their behavior, there may be an opportunity to explore other accommodations. So, for example, we'll talk even more about this later. I shared with you that there was an instance earlier in my life where I just needed the radio to be turned down. And for full context, not only was the radio blaring, but also multiple of my own children were chattering. And so there was just so much going on that I honestly could not hear myself think. And so, anyone who says that phrase, there may be something else happening for them. And so is it an opportunity to say, all right, well, instead of having everyone in open bullpen styles within our floor, could we designate a space that's quieter and kind of set off to the side for those individuals who process information differently, who process information and need it more in a quieter space? That's just one example in terms of celebrating difference and being able to really recognize and accept. Let's talk a little bit about what neurodiversity is not. It is not a medical condition. It's not a mental health problem. It's not a disease. It's not always a deficit or impairment. Focus on always. And it's not always a disability. And so you may be thinking, okay, well, Shatanese, what's the difference? So I'm glad you asked. So neurodiversity versus disabilities. So that's often misunderstood as interchangeable terms, but they really truly are distinct concepts. So neurodiversity encompasses, as you see on the screen, a range of neurological variations among individuals, such as autism, ADHD, as what I shared on the screen earlier. It views these differences as natural variations in human cognition and behavior, emphasizing the strengths and unique perspectives of neurodivergent individuals. The neurodiversity movement advocates for accommodation and support rather than focusing on fixing, as I stated before. Whereas disabilities, as defined by the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, refer to impairments that may affect a person's body or mental functions, leading to limitations in activities and the limited ability in terms of participating in day-to-day life. Disabilities can be visible like mobility issues or hearing impairments or invisible, such as autism or dyslexia, as we mentioned earlier. They're often associated with difficulties, specific life activities, such as communicating or learning or movement. And so the slide that I referenced earlier in terms of Josiah, he has Down syndrome. So he has a learning disability, which means while he's 9 years old, in terms of his age and time that he's been with us on Earth, mentally and developmentally from an academic perspective, he's more around the 6 year old range. And so we as his parents and in partnership with the teachers have to remember that while he's 9 and he may even have the height of a 9-year-old, developmentally he's a few years behind. And so that, in full transparency, it took some time for me to really understand and appreciate. Here I'd had 5 children prior to Josiah, still all differing in how they approach life, but not necessarily to the level that Josiah presents with. So it has been a learning journey, and we're still on a journey because we're trying to figure out how to really tap into Josiah's learning style. So you give him an iPad, I tell you, he can navigate that iPad with his eyes closed. You ask Josiah to spell his name fully, crickets. I'm just like, really? So, he'll bring me the iPad. He'll show me that he's navigated to the pictures. He knows how to get to YouTube, like all of those things. But then, we're struggling with some of the basics, and, in terms of his name recognition. So it's still a journey. And, as I mentioned, these are the definitions of disability. And so, it's important as HR professionals that we remind ourselves, we remind our leaders, we remind everyone, because again, it may be an opportunity to really, truly pause and assess what is happening within the workforce. Disabilities result from interaction between individuals with a health condition such as cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, as I mentioned about Josiah, and depression, with personal and environmental factors, including negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation, and public buildings and limited social support. And so we certainly try to support Josiah in being as independent as possible. A real tangible example of that is how he's dressed in the morning. Navigating buttons or tying his shoe those are really challenging tasks for him to complete at this stage of his development. So instead, we make sure that he has shirts that he can pull over, without any assistance, or he has shoes that have Velcro. So, we encourage Josiah to dress himself. Sometimes that means things are on backwards, shoes are on the wrong feet, but he did it, right? We're focusing on he did it. And so I celebrate that he did it, and then we make some minor adjustments before I send him out into the world. Even with making his bed, repeating, telling him that you have to stretch out the 4 corners. And so, for example, today he made his bed. It wasn't as smooth as mom would like it, but I didn't touch it. I left it. I said, yes, way to go. Good job. You're 9 now. So it's important for you to be able to make your bed. And of course, he just beamed with pride. And so within the workforce, I know there are certainly opportunities for us to do the same for our employees. I'm not suggesting that we treat them like our kids, not that at all, but instead that we're really truly focusing on their efforts, and making sure that we're addressing any nuances that we may see in appropriate manner. All right, key differences that I want to point out here. In terms of origin, neurodiversity arises from natural variations in brain function, whereas disabilities often result from impairments or physical or in mental or physical capacities. perception. Neurodiversity celebrates differences and seeks to integrate neurodivergent perspectives into society, whereas disabilities are often viewed through a lens of impairment and adaptation to societal norms. I'll tell you, just yesterday, I was on site facilitating for a client and was trying to find parking. And I saw a sign that said handicap area. Just the hairs went up on the back of my neck because just that sign in itself felt very limiting. And I have thought about going in and trying to find someone who was responsible for the signs to get them to, to change it, to instead say, wheelchair accessible or something along those lines. Words absolutely have power, and that feeds into perception. Lastly, approach. Neurodiversity model advocates for acceptance and accommodation, as I've mentioned before, emphasizing the strengths and the diverse cognitive styles, where disability models may focus on overcoming limitations and improving accessibility. So in my example with Josiah, we've really tried not to just focus on Josiah has Down syndrome. We instead focus on what can Josiah do and what does Josiah need assistance with. So for example, I'll either encourage him to go get the bread, the peanut butter, and the jelly if he wants a sandwich, or I'll pull everything out with a safety knife, and I invite him, go ahead, make your sandwich. And because of who I am, I may have to close my eyes as I watch him mix the peanut butter and the jelly, but he's doing it, right? And so I have to make sure that I'm not being a helicopter mom and dampening his effort to try, and then, coach as we go along. I have a poll for you. Should employees disclose non-apparent disabilities? Should employees disclose non-apparent disabilities? Thank you, Alice, for launching that poll.
Yep, and everybody is jumping on so that to answer, so that's great. We'll give it a couple of minutes for everyone to be able to give their input.
Awesome. I'll play the Jeopardy. Da, da,
I know.
da,
We're at 72% participation. We can get a little bit more, hopefully.
da, 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 da. While the participants are answering the poll, I'll just say quickly, I saw Pat Sajak for the first time. Pat Sajak is on Wheel of Fortune. And I thought, Pat, oh, it's so good to see you. So Alice has the poll closed.
Yep, here, well, we got 75%, but it's almost there. So here you go. Can you see those results?
I am looking. So yes, I do see the results. I'm actually trying to make some adjustments here so I can actually move that over. So 56 say yes, 20% say no, and 24% say they are not sure. And that's pretty honest. I appreciate everyone's honesty in responding to the poll. And we will talk about the kind of the pros and cons of whether individuals should or should not. So based on a recent article, I actually have it here, the Society of Human Resource HR magazine. I'm not pushing that or anything along those lines, but definitely a great source of information if you want to know all things HR. So 16% of US employees report having a non-apparent disability. And so what does that mean for you in the workforce? 47% of those 16 have chosen not to disclose their non-apparent disability at work. And you may be thinking, well, why? 31% believe that disclosure would cause others to think that they do not do their work. And so when I read these stats, I was actually very disheartened because what this means to me that as an HR profession, we still have a long ways to go in terms of making sure that our environments, our workforces are inclusive and psychologically safe. And so the reality is, we know that our managers are possibly, in many cases, not trained to truly address these issues appropriately. And even from an organization perspective, there may be hesitancy, resistance, lack of awareness on how to approach these topics with some level of respect and some level of discretion. And so think about that. 31% believe that their disclosure would cause others to think that they could not do their work. So not only are they dealing with, coping with, managing being neurodiverse, but they're also trying to manage others' perceptions of them. And then 47% are choosing not to share out of that fear, out of that concern, out of the reality that if they do share, it won't be handled appropriately. And so, what can we do as a profession? What can we do as an individual to educate not only ourselves, but also our teams? And also to make sure that we are creating a space where people can say, hey, I process differently. I need some assistance. I need some additional support. And so can you imagine how difficult that may be? I just want to let that sit for a moment. That you're trying to work as diligently as possible, but there's fear. So here's some areas of consideration specifically for managers. Hopefully, your managers are trained to recognize and leverage the unique strengths and talents of neurodivergent employees. And again, people may not be diagnosed. They may not fully know or appreciate where they are in terms of processing information. But you can certainly err on the side of just simply being inclusive. Managers can foster inclusivity by accommodating sensory needs. And again, these suggestions should all be within the company's reason in terms of accommodation. So just as I suggested before, having that set aside space for individuals who it's just too loud to process, and making sure that in meetings, there's the space for individuals who are processing in different ways. Using straightforward communication and avoiding sarcasm or ambiguity, because sometimes individuals can take what you say literally. And so again, just being mindful of any communication that's sent out, is it clear and concise? Providing concise instructions and making sure that tasks are kind of broken into manageable steps. And so it's not necessary to just simply dump a large project on someone and say, good luck, I'll see you in 60 days or 90 days. Especially if someone has presented issues or concerns with how they are, processing, responding. And so I'm not suggesting that managers, jump to conclusions. You can certainly have conversations with individuals and say, okay, I see that you haven't met a couple of deadlines. Let's try this instead. Or is there another approach that you'd like us to try? And so really making it kind of a win-win and not necessarily approaching it from a punitive perspective. Be accommodating of different work styles and preferences. So if that means individuals love coming in early, because their brain gets going, better in the mornings? That's me. Or do you have someone who likes to work later, just because it's just better for them to be able to process, at a later time when everything kind of has calmed down and the world is kind of going to sleep? If your project or team commitments allow for that flexibility, certainly encourage you to make that as an accommodation. Avoid assumptions, as I alluded to earlier. Making sure that you are inquiring, asking, do you have what you need in order to be successful with this project, with this deadline, with this commitment? And sometimes individuals may not be fully honest with themselves. And so, from a managerial perspective, you're pointing out whether it's missed deadlines or missed objectives, in stating, this is what I need. Are you able to deliver on this? And as I said earlier, why don't we try this? And so, from an HR perspective, take a step back and make sure that your recruitment processes are, actively including those who are neurodivergent. So that may mean, not everything is written, or do you have things in audio? Are your job descriptions in bite-sized pieces of information? It's been a while since I've been on a search, and I know Career Spa probably has been, evaluating how they're connecting with candidates, but I can remember the days of long ago when companies would just plop a job description out there and say, come and apply. And so maybe that's not the best way to attract a diverse pool of candidates. Maybe you are having audio and or video interviews or in person. And so just encouraging you to evaluate all of your processes so that it is inclusive. Making sure you're looking at the types of tests and assessments that you're using, making sure that candidates who are not traditional still have an opportunity to go through the process. And then we've talked kind of loosely about workplace accommodations and ensuring that it's not costly to the organization. Some of the suggestions or support that individuals need are low cost and easy to implement. And so you're able to really, again, have a win-win. Someone is able to operate in their gift, and you as an organization are able to reap the benefits from them achieving at their greatest potential. And then we've also talked about offering flexible work arrangements if possible. I recognize that there are some roles that you just cannot work from home, but maybe there's some other ways that some flexibility can be considered. Some additional areas, training and education, making sure that your managers are going through various training to be mindful of the words that they're using, to be mindful of the tactics. I know throughout my career as an HR professional, I've had a number of managers that will come into my office, put their head in their hands and say, this is not what I signed up for. Managing people is difficult. It truly is, but it can also be the most rewarding part of being a manager. Being able to meet people where they are and not simply treating everyone the same. And so, we get into a little bit of equality versus equity there. And so, having mentorship programs is also a great suggestion to make sure that you're tapping into a wide variety of how people are approaching the work. And think about onboarding. I work with a client where the individual was visually impaired and needed an interpreter. And I'm sorry, he was hearing impaired and needed an interpreter, but he was talking about how the information that was sent out via the company did not take into consideration his own disability, his own needs. And so he was struggling to find out about what was happening because the way the information was being presented was focused on individuals who didn't have disabilities. and making sure that you are assessing and adjusting any type of support mechanisms so that they stay current, they stay fresh. I'll spend some time before we start wrapping up on how to support someone who's neurodivergent. Listen and validate. Taking the time to listen actively and also empathetically will just really go a long way to make the person feel as if they're seen and heard in the space. Validating their experiences. And so you definitely don't want to minimize or even gaslight someone, which means you're negating what their perspective is or what their lived experience is. And making sure that you're being curious about what they've experienced and asking questions. Adapting communication styles. What I mean by that is if someone shares with you how they prefer to be communicated with, whether that's via text, whether that's audio, whether that's via email, whatever the case may be, being sensitive to that. I have a colleague who stated one of her colleagues sent her a lengthy email similar to a dissertation, and it was overwhelming. And so she picked up the phone and called the colleague and said, "Hey, do you mind just sending me an audio clip of what it is that you're asking me to do?" And so thankfully the colleague obliged. And so my colleague was relieved because they were able to then process the information better. Avoiding value-based labels. And so refraining from using terms like high functioning or low functioning, which can really oversimplify abilities. Recognize individuality. And so understanding that each person within neurodiversity is unique. Just like each of us, we are unique. Our personalities, our preferences, our strengths. And so really truly meeting someone where they are. Challenge assumptions. And so if you overhear someone talking about a group of individuals or an individual regarding their capabilities or their intelligence, making sure that you challenge those within yourself and within others, and trying to your best to appreciate and celebrate whenever you can. And then promoting respect and inclusion, treating everyone with dignity and promoting, an inclusive environment. Can we normalize accommodations? Like, is that something that we can, truly strive for as an HR profession? And so, that certainly honors individuals' needs for support and inclusion. And so wrapping up, the key takeaways that I want to make sure that you have today are neurodiversity is a spectrum. So it's not one or two concepts. It's a spectrum, as I shared with you on an earlier slide. Inclusive environments matter. And so, what can you do as an HR professional, as a leader, just to, look at your workplace and, walk or navigate the area and, see, is this inclusive? If I was someone who is neurodivergent, could I really thrive in this environment? Making sure that you're tailoring support and accommodation on a case-by-case basis, and of course, within your policies and procedures within your organization. And that you are aware of how you're communicating. So having open communication and really truly raising awareness around these issues will lead towards having a more inclusive environment and embracing individual strengths. So it's important to focus on the contributions and the value add and less on the limitations. And so with that, I'll pause to see if we have any questions before I turn it back over to Alice.
Yeah, so I don't thank you so much for that. And we are getting some questions, and I would extend anyone who is on the webinar to definitely go into our question and answer section and ask anything you want to of Shatanese for sure. One person said, I typically advise talent to disclose if they need special accommodations. So that was a comment.
And Alice, I want to respond to that. I remember someone asking me about that, going through the recruitment process. And I said, you absolutely can disclose and be mindful of if you're disclosing it to hiring managers. Sometimes hiring managers are not quite sure what to do with that information. So it's best if it's disclosed specifically to HR. But I always want and invite people to be their true authentic selves. And so there's, depending on where they're applying, that can be a gamble.
Thank you. Another one is neurodiversity covered under ADA?
That's a great question. So that's something I'd have to research even further, but ADA is more focused on the Americans with disabilities. And so neurodiversity is not necessarily considered as a disability. And so it's more kind of a diverse way of thinking. So we're not quite there yet, but I can certainly conduct additional information just to confirm, but they're separating those out.
Perfect, thank you. And this is somewhat of a similar question. It says, can I ask you to say more about your purpose in juxtaposing neurodiversity and disability, which I've heard some older, more medicalized ways of framing disability and more modern and positive ways of framing neurodiversity. I would like to suggest that disability also arises from natural variation. It's part of human diversity.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. And so for the purpose of this webinar, I chose neurodiversity and disability, but certainly am open to exploring, other terminology as well. So thank you so much for that feedback.
And then I have heard accommodations referred to as success enablers instead to reduce the stigma.
I love that. Success enablers. I love that. That's not necessarily a wide reaching or it hasn't reached many organizations as of yet. But that's certainly something I'll keep in mind as well in terms of terminology. So thank you for that.
Person says, this was very informative. Our organization is working on our DEI initiatives, and this will be helpful as we work to create an inclusive culture. Next one says, what does one do when a manager is insensitive and bullies their employees in their reviews and HR looks the other way? Yikes, this might be a more in-depth question, but
Yes, that definitely sounds like a troubling situation. I would encourage that individual to try to connect with HR once again, and then explore other opportunities within the organization to see if they can get some support. And then if not, there may be some opportunities outside of the organization where they can get some support. But without knowing the full details, it would be difficult for me to offer specific suggestions. But that definitely sounds like a really difficult situation.
for sure. Someone says, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities, including those with neurodivergent conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and anxiety disorders. So
Thank you. Thank you for that additional information. So, though in my research, I had seen it, kind of separated out in terms of neurodiversity over here, but I can see with the autism and the other aspects of neurodiversity, how the ADA has actually included that in. So, thank you for that additional detail.
yeah. And do you have any perspectives about intersectionality for folks that experience multiple disabilities?
Repeat that question one more time, Alice.
Do you have any perspectives about intersectionality for folks that experience multiple disabilities? Lots of big words in there.
Other than ensuring they are connected with their HR so that they can have success enabling opportunities, trying to use the terminology that one of the other participants just offered. Yeah, I also know that it can be a challenge for individuals with multiple ways that they are approaching the world. And so making sure that they have the support by vocalizing and articulating what they need is extremely important. So connecting with HR, and whenever possible, making sure that their manager is well versed on what's appropriate and what's necessary. So that's what I would suggest initially.
Excellent, thank you. And conclusion, our last one is this was a great webinar. Working for a small, fast-paced company, so many things, including DEI, sometimes don't get the attention it needs. And hopefully, me sharing information here can move us forward in that area. So can move our thinking forward in that area. So
Awesome. Thank you so much.
yeah, great. And then thank you for sharing and explaining the differences between neurodiversity and disability. I think the term neurodiversity has been a newer term that more people need to be made aware of. This was great. Thank you. Which that was one of my questions too is, why, and I can relate. I have a niece who has Down syndrome as well, and she is 10 now. So, but why is neurodiversity such a hot topic now then?
For the reasons that many of the individuals have placed in the Q&A, just in terms of the intersectionality, as one of the participants mentioned, and also that more individuals are becoming aware of how their brain is functioning. And so it's becoming more important for HR to be mindful of what's happening with every employee. And so, as I stated earlier, I think more employees are becoming braver with being able to say, hey, I need some assistance. So, but I certainly appreciate that as an HR professional, there are so many different things that are happening and going on. And even as a manager, that it's important to stay abreast of all of the terms that are, coming down the pipeline and becoming more important, more prevalent. So,
Yes, thank you for that for sure. Let's see, I have one more. Let's see, neurodiversity is regarded, but it's a newer conversation, so it's viewed as a mixed moment. So excellent. Well, thank you so much, Shatanese. We so appreciate your time today. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our Wednesday webinar series. A little bit more information here is how to get a hold of the 2 QR codes to how to get a hold of Shatanese. And also then here are all the ways to connect with her for anybody who has more questions, more answers. Obviously is a lot of details in the experiences. So appreciate your time with us for sure. Talent Connections, just as our host, is a human resource executive search firm and consulting firm located in Atlanta. Founded in 1999, we have spent over 2 decades perfecting our craft in HR services while creating thousands of transformative connections. We also have Career Spa, which provides career transition and coaching services tailored to each individual, helping you to discover your career path and secure advantage in this evolving market. As you can see on the next slide, then the activity code for this webinar that has been approved for 1 professional development credit is 24-C5PYX. And you can note that activity ID number on your recertification application form. I also know that Shatanese, you had talked about for our listeners a special offer that you were going to provide for them as well.
Yes, and so anyone who is interested in either an emotional intelligence assessment and debrief or a DISC assessment and debrief. And so DISC is dominance, influence, steady, and conscientious. For those who attended today, I'd be willing to offer half off. And so you just need to connect with me if you're interested in taking advantage of either one of those. And we would go from there. So just send me a message and let me know that you attended this Wednesday webinar series. And I would love to work with you if that's something that's of interest. So a one-on-one EQ or DISC debrief.
Thank you. That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shatanese, for your time today. We really appreciate this, and it's been so informative. And I know I personally have learned a lot, and I know we've had a great amount of discussion here. So we appreciate that. And everybody, remember to mark your calendars for our next Wednesday webinar, which will be Wednesday, September the 11th. Same time, always 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks again. We appreciate your time.
And Alice, I think someone asked about the credit, so I just put this screen back up.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Yes, it is 24-C5PYX is the SHRM credit. So great. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye.